just because people reject you does not mean God has rejected you. See, in the book of 1 Samuel, God sent a prophet to select a man that God has chosen. But David's father kept giving the prophet his brothers. He kept bringing the strongest, the tallest, the wisest. See, the way people select and the way God selects is very different. And then David's father never thought to call for David. He says, these are my sons. These are the strongest ones. These are the ones I'm proud of. These are the ones that will fight a battle and win. These are the ones that God needs. And it's interesting because the prophet asks, are all your sons? I mean, is there maybe someone somewhere that you have forgotten? And somewhere David's father says, oh, the youngest. He calls him the youngest. He says, there is one that I have who's the youngest. See, sometimes people will look at your height. Sometimes people will look at your age. Sometimes people will try to determine if you're worth being called. Some will judge and evaluate your spiritual journey to say, oh, that person can be used by God. But here is the interesting thing. God chose David, but his family did not even think that he could be worth it, that he could be worth being used by God. So they bring David, and God says, this is the one that I want you to anoint. This is the one that will be my servant. And David ended up being the one who fought Goliath. But yet the interesting thing is when he got there, even Saul, all the soldiers were wondering, how can such young man fight such big warrior? Sometimes people will look at you and determine if you can win a battle. Sometimes people can look at you and try to tell you if you're worth being used by God or not. Sometimes even as Christians, we do that. We reject people that God has selected. We have this way of thinking who is more worth being used, but God will always choose the ones that seem to be less, because those are the ones that God uses to reveal His glory. It's through our weakness that God's strength shines. It's through where we can't do more that God always does much. So some of us have been rejected. Some of us has been forgotten. Some of us, people put labels. You don't look spiritual. You can't be used by God. I mean, look at they look at your social media and they try to determine what spiritual looks like. But just because they have rejected you does not mean that God has rejected you. God's selection is man's rejection. So remember that even Jesus was placed on the cross. Even Jesus was forgotten. Even Jesus, they did not believe that He was the Son of God because He didn't look like God. He didn't come the way that they thought God would come. He came humbly through the womb of a woman and became a carpenter. And some of you are looking at you and wondering and maybe thinking that you are not worth being used by God. But I'm here to tell you that the way God sees you and the way they see you is two different things. So don't give up because of what your parents are saying. Don't give up because of what they're saying. Don't give up because they're saying that you can't get there. You can get there because God is still waiting on you to be obedient and to realize that their rejection does not mean God has rejected you. Your strength is not in how they view you. Your strength is what God has said about you. And He's ready to anoint you, to use you, even though people have said you are not qualified. He will always use those who are not qualified to shame those who think are qualified.